Joni would make us the best toasted cheese sandwiches. Okay, she would. And we'd all sit there and eat toasted cheese and either turkey or ham. And she would grill them just right and bring them over, and we'd see it. So
there is a phone call that almost nobody outside a very small circle of people has ever heard described in full. It happened 2 days before Marcus Lamb died. He was in the hospital, his body failing from COVID-19, but his mind was still clear. He picked up the phone and he called a woman named Denise Boggs, not a board member, not an attorney, not a ministry executive, a trusted friend, someone this family had brought into their most private and painful moments, someone Marcus Lamb knew well enough to call when time was running out and the words had to land somewhere safe. And what he told her in that conversation has sat at the center of one of the most documented, most consequential, and most heartbreaking stories in American Christian broadcasting for the past 4.5 years. Before we go any further, the sourcing note this story requires. This video is based on reporting published by The Roys Report, founded by veteran investigative journalist Julie Roys, a former CBS television reporter. Additional confirmed sources include the authenticated November 16, 2023 board meeting recording published by The Roys Report, The Roys Report podcast episode 176, featuring Lisa Anderson, published January 23, 2025, the published letter from Denise Boggs to the Lamb family, obtained and verified by The Roys Report, the Bonita Beth Brock email exchange published by The Roys Report, the internal Daystar salary documents published by The Roys Report in March 2025, the Trinity Foundation's property and financial research, the confirmed Daystar About page and Marcus Lamb biography on Daystar.com, and the Living Waters Ministry website for Denise Boggs' confirmed professional biography. Where accounts are based on single-source testimony or remain disputed, that will be identified clearly. Where documents are authenticated, that will be stated directly. Now let us go back to the beginning, not of the conflict, but of the institution, because you cannot understand what Denise Boggs has carried and why her silence finally broke without understanding what Marcus Lamb built and what he believed it was for. Marcus Lamb built his first television station, WMCF-TV in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1993, becoming what Daystar's own history describes as the youngest person in America to build a full-power television station at the time. From that single station, he and Joni constructed an empire. Daystar Television Network launched as a full network on December 31, 1997, and by the time Marcus died on November 30, 2021, Daystar reached what the organization itself described as 64.7 million American households, more than Trinity Broadcasting Network's 47.3 million, making it, by Daystar's own accounting, the largest Christian television network in the United States. It was a generational achievement. It was built on relentless faith, sacrifice, and the particular kind of drive that Marcus Lamb carried everywhere he went. He was not a passive figure. He did not leave things to chance. He had very specific ideas about what he had built, who should lead it after him, and what the ministry was supposed to stand for when he was no longer there to protect it. And so, in the final days of his life, he made a phone call. Denise Boggs co-founded Living Waters Ministry in 1998 alongside her husband, Lee Boggs, in Hiddenite, North Carolina. Their ministry is confirmed at 4803 Old Vashti Road, Hiddenite, NC 28636, and Denise has appeared on Daystar's own programming. A February 2021 Ministry Now appearance is confirmed on Living Waters Ministry's own website. She was not a stranger to this family. She was someone Marcus and Joni had brought in personally to help navigate some of the most difficult internal conflicts the family had faced, including the aftermath of an incident that occurred at a Daystar executive retreat in Miramar Beach, Florida in August 2021, a retreat at which Jonathan Lamb discovered his 5-year-old daughter alone in a room with a male family member in circumstances that alarmed both Jonathan and his wife Suzy deeply. Denise Boggs was not a reporter looking in from the outside. She was someone the Lambs had trusted in their worst moments. Marcus knew her character. He knew she would carry his words carefully, and 2 days before he died, he called her. By every account of those who have spoken about it publicly, Marcus was not confused on that call. He was not drifting in and out. He was not delivering vague, emotional hopes for the ministry's future in the way a man might speak in grief or sedation. His voice was purposeful, and what he communicated was specific. According to reporting across multiple platforms covering this story, including audio that began circulating within the ministry community, Marcus carefully outlined a succession plan for Daystar. He named his son Jonathan to lead the network. He assigned specific roles to Jonathan's wife Suzy. He outlined responsibilities for his daughters, Rachel and Rebecca. This was not an impulsive conversation. It had the character of a blueprint, deliberate and detailed, the kind of framework a man creates when he knows he is running out of time and wants to make sure his life's work survives him intact. And then there was the silence that spoke as loudly as anything Marcus said. By the account of those describing that conversation, he never once mentioned Joni, his wife of more than 3 decades, the woman who had been on stage beside him for every significant public moment in Daystar's history. He did not assign her a role. He did not name her as his successor. He did not include her in the framework he laid out for who would lead what he had built. To Denise Boggs, that silence was not accidental. It communicated something about trust, about who Marcus believed was genuinely equipped to lead, and about what he wanted done with the institution he had spent his life building. At the end of the call, Marcus charged Denise with a serious and specific responsibility to make sure those wishes reached the people who needed to hear them and were honored. What Denise did with that responsibility in the months and years that followed is a story of patience, wearing down into grief. She did not immediately go public. She did not call journalists or arrange statements. She held those words carefully, praying over them, trusting that the people Marcus had named would step naturally into what he had intended, that the blueprint would hold without having to be forced. At first, the outward picture of the ministry seemed intact. The memorial celebrations were moving. Joni appeared composed and eloquent on camera, speaking about Marcus's legacy with what looked like grace and clarity. The network continued broadcasting. The donations kept coming in, but Denise was watching more carefully than most. And beneath the surface, the picture she was seeing was different from the one on the screen. Jonathan's presence in broadcasts began to fade, slowly at first, a missed appearance here, a name left off a project there, and then more systematically, until he was barely visible at all. Suzy went quiet too, easing out of her co-hosting role on the green room as if she had simply stepped away on her own terms. There was no announcement, no formal statement, no explanation offered to the viewers or the partner base who had watched both of them as trusted members of the Lamb Ministry family. To someone who did not know what Denise knew, it might have looked like a natural recalibration after a loss, a grieving family finding its footing. To someone who had heard Marcus's instructions 2 days before he died, it looked like something else entirely. The documented timeline of what happened to Jonathan Lamb at Daystar is a matter of verified public record, reported in detail by the Roy's report. Jonathan had been serving as the network's vice president. In April 2024, he was demoted to a manager-level position with a 40% salary reduction, from $250,000 to $150,000, a figure confirmed by the internal Daystar final salary review for 2023, published by the Roy's report in March 2025. The demotion followed his refusal to sign a non-disclosure agreement that the Daystar board and its attorney presented to him at a board meeting on November 16, 2023, a meeting Jonathan recorded and later provided to the Roy's report. The audio of that meeting is published and authenticated. In it, Jonathan is told directly, sign the NDA or face the loss of his board position and vice president role. He refused. In November 2024, Daystar fired him entirely. The termination letter was delivered on a Saturday morning by Daystar's head of security, Shannon Kelly, who arrived at Jonathan and Suzy's home wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a firearm. The termination cited a failure to address deficiencies in his judgment and performance. Suzy had already been removed from the green room in July 2023, abruptly, without any public explanation. Her in-laws, Daystar employees, were fired one by one in the months surrounding Jonathan's own termination. This was not a ministry leadership team reorganizing after a season of loss. This was a methodical and documented removal of the people Marcus Lamb had named on his deathbed as his intended successors, carried out across 3 years using legal instruments, board authority, and institutional control, without any public acknowledgement of what Marcus had asked for in that final phone call to Denise Boggs. For Denise, watching this unfold was not abstract. It was the lived experience of holding a man's final words in trust and watching those words be set aside. One quiet institutional decision at a time. She gave grace where she could. She told herself there were dynamics she could not see from where she stood. She prayed. She waited. But the more systematically the people Marcus had named were removed, the heavier the silence around what she knew became. Eventually, patience had nowhere left to go. She was not the only one watching with growing alarm. By the time Denise began to speak more openly about what she knew, other voices from inside the network had already begun to surface. One of the most significant came from Lisa Anderson. Anderson served as executive assistant to both Marcus and Joni Lamb from 2007 to 2011. In that role, she worked directly with the founders and their immediate family, traveled with the ministry internationally, including to the Holy Land, and was present for events and dynamics behind the cameras that the public never saw. She appeared on the Roy's Report podcast on January 23, 2025, in episode 176, in an interview that ran more than an hour. Her testimony is documented and published. What Anderson described from her 4 years inside the network was not a sudden corruption, but a gradual one, a visible transformation in tone and culture as financial success, fame, and platform grew. She said that fortune and fame changed Joni Lamb from someone humble and accessible into someone harder, more protected, and less transparent. She described double standards that permeated the institution, expectations and accountability that applied to the Lamb family in one way and to everyone else in another. She described financial practices that raised questions she felt were never adequately answered. She described an atmosphere in which the cost of speaking out or considering legal action was made explicitly and deliberately clear. Marcus Lamb, she said, told the staff directly that if anyone was thinking of suing Daystar, they would face his full legal team. The message was not subtle, silence was expected, and defiance had a price. Anderson herself was eventually sidelined and pressured out. She was ultimately replaced by multiple people to cover the work she had been doing alone, a pattern that a commenter on the Roy's Report's published podcast page noted had been experienced at other large Christian ministries as well, suggesting the dynamic is not unique to Daystar. Joni reportedly discouraged staff from maintaining outside friendships and social relationships during their employment, a practice that, whether intentional or not, created a culture of isolation that bound employees more tightly to the network and made it more difficult for them to develop the kind of outside perspective that might have led them to question what they were seeing. Anderson described the open, collegial environment she had initially experienced, giving way to something more guarded, more political, and more controlled over her 4 years. She said the network acted Christian in front of the cameras and behaved as carnally as any secular broadcast outlet behind them. That phrase is a verbatim quotation from the Roy's Report's published description of her account. The internal, informal language that emerged among people close to the institution to describe the power structure around Joni Lamb, the nickname that circulated because formal language could not capture what people inside were experiencing, was the Daystar Mafia. Nobody voted on that term. Nobody assigned it officially. It arose the way dark institutional shorthand always arises, organically, from people who needed a label that could communicate something real about an influence structure that had no publicly visible form. A close inner circle around Joni, whose power was real and undeniable even when it was officially unacknowledged. This group controlled access to meetings, to the founder, to decisions about personnel. Loyalty to the circle was the institutional currency. Questioning the circle's judgment, even calmly, even with documented evidence behind the question, was experienced not as accountability, but as a form of disloyalty that carried consequences. Denise Boggs experienced this dynamic firsthand in a specific and documented way. On November 18, 2023, in a recorded conversation with Jonathan and Suzy Lamb that the Roy's Report obtained and published as part of its tracked followed fired reporting, Denise described a critical moment from the aftermath of the August 2021 Miramar Beach incident. A licensed forensic counselor named Debbie Leonhardt had been brought in after the incident to conduct a proper professional assessment. Denise told Jonathan and Suzy in that recorded conversation that Marcus and Joni had said they wanted to drop everything, that they did not want anything more written down or documented. That instruction reached Leonhardt. The professional assessment process was effectively shut down before it could produce a formal written conclusion about the individual at the center of Jonathan and Suzy's concern. The process had been initiated, a credentialed professional had been brought in, and then the process was closed by the founders before it ran its course. The documented result was that no formal written assessment of the situation was ever completed and placed on record. On screen, through all of this, Joni remained composed, steady, in control. She gave no public explanation for why Jonathan and Suzy had disappeared from the network. She offered no public comment on the board meeting recording or the NDA demand or the termination letter. She maintained the polished exterior of a ministry in good order, even as the people her late husband had named to lead that ministry were being systematically removed from it. And the donors who kept giving, who had given for years, who had watched Marcus and Joni build something from a single Alabama station into a network claiming 2 billion international homes, had no mechanism available to them to see beneath the surface. Daystar, organized under Word of God Fellowship Incorporated, carries a church designation with the IRS. That designation legally exempts it from filing the Form 990 financial disclosure document that virtually every comparable nonprofit organization is required to submit publicly. Trinity Broadcasting Network, which Daystar claims to outreach in American households, files a Form 990. Anyone who gives to TBN can open a public government database and see the network's board composition, its top executive salaries, its largest financial transactions. Anyone who gives to Daystar cannot. There is no equivalent public document. The financial picture that has entered the public record exists there only because of investigative journalism, not because Daystar chose transparency. What that journalism uncovered is specific and documented. The Roy's report obtained and published internal expense reports showing that Joni charged her Daystar corporate credit card for more than $100,000 in honeymoon expenses at Las Ventanas al Paraíso in Los Cabos, Mexico, a figure confirmed by an itemized resort bill, putting the total at $103,818. Joni publicly denied any Daystar money paid for the honeymoon. The expense reports confirmed otherwise. When the Roy's report requested documentation of any reimbursement, Daystar provided none. Joni's compensation in 2022, the year following Marcus's death, jumped 140%, from $436,750 in 2021 to $1,048,200 in 2022, confirmed by the internal salary document. That made her the single highest compensated person at the network by an enormous margin, more than 3 times the salary of CFO Arnold Torres at $300,000. Joni owned 7 homes across 4 states with a combined confirmed value of $11.7 million at the time of the Roy's report and Trinity Foundation's documented investigation in March 2025. The Trinity Foundation identified approximately $769,220 in ministry jet costs connected to personal travel during the period of Joni's marriage to Doug Weiss. And in March 2026, approximately 8 weeks before her death, Joni executed a quitclaim deed on a condominium in Miramar Beach, Florida, valued at approximately $2.9 million, moving it unilaterally into her personal revocable trust without Doug Weiss's signature. These are not assertions. They are figures drawn from authenticated internal documents, filed property records, and the published research of 2 independent investigative organizations. The donors who provided the revenue underlying all of it were not given access to any of this information through Daystar's own communications. They received telethon appeals and partnership letters and monthly newsletters that described a ministry with a global mission and a faithful partner base. What they did not receive was a financial accounting. One of those donors eventually decided she had given enough in silence. Benita Beth Brock of Sarcoxie, Missouri, had donated to Daystar since 1997. 27 years of faithful giving to a network she had trusted. When the Roy's report's investigations became public, Brock wrote to Daystar directly. Her letter expressed her concern about the alleged financial mismanagement and what she described as the dismissal of the abuse of a child. She asked for a refund of her 27 years of donations. She did not specify a dollar figure. She asked for accountability and a return. What came back was a letter from Barbie Harris, Daystar's administrator and syndication coordinator. Harris touted the network's reach, 2.8 billion homes globally by Daystar's own count. She listed its ministry accomplishments. She defended the network's fund separation practices. And then she addressed Jonathan Lamb, not the refund request, not the abuse allegation. Jonathan. Harris wrote that he had taken on, in her exact words, such a corrupt spirit of greed and power that he twists any truth just to destroy and slander his own mother and even his deceased father. That letter is a published document provided by Brock to the Roy's report and verified in full. Read that sequence carefully. A 27-year donor wrote to a Christian ministry asking why her money appeared to have been misused and why the abuse of a child had allegedly been dismissed. The response she received attacked the character of the man the ministry's founder had named as his successor from his hospital bed, not with evidence, not with documentation, with a characterization of his spirit. Attorney Christine Jones, who serves on the Roy's Reports board, reviewed the exchange and told the Roy's Report that Daystar's disparaging comments about Jonathan were not only inappropriate, but potentially defamatory. She said the better course would have been to thank the donor and refund the money without condition. She also addressed the broader financial record directly, stating that spending on mansions, expensive vacations, private planes, and other documented luxury expenses raises serious questions about whether a religious nonprofit organized as a church should be diverting millions of dollars from ministry efforts to support the personal lifestyle of its leadership and their families. Denise Boggs had written her own letter, not to donors, but to Joni's family, in April 2023, 2 months before the June 10th wedding, to Doug Weiss. That letter was obtained, verified, and published by the Roy's Report. In it, Denise described voicing her concerns about Weiss to Joni directly and being rebuffed. She wrote that Joni had come under a spirit of deception due to Weiss's influence. She called Weiss a wolf in sheep's clothing and stated he was of no caliber for such a high platform. She wrote that Joni had not endorsed divorce until she came under his deception. This was not commentary from a distance. This was a professional assessment from a woman who had counseled both Doug and Lisa Weiss in the period before the divorce and had direct knowledge of the dynamics that produced it. Joni did not respond to that assessment by reconsidering. She responded by proceeding with the wedding 6 weeks later. By the time Joni died on May 7th, 2026, Denise Boggs had been carrying Marcus Lamb's final words for 4.5 years. She had watched the people he named get fired. She had watched the institution defend itself by attacking the character of the man she had heard Marcus name. She had watched a 27-year donor get blamed for asking a legitimate question. She had watched the professional assessment process she had been part of get shut down before it could produce a written conclusion. She had watched a letter she wrote to Joni's family get filed away while the wedding proceeded. She had held all of that in relative public silence, through patience and prayer, waiting for something to shift. And then the woman she had been watching make those decisions, the woman who had taken her concerns and set them aside, was gone. After Joni's death, Denise began to speak, not through a press conference, not through a formal media campaign. She began to describe to people she trusted what Marcus had told her from his hospital bed. Audio of her describing that conversation has circulated in the ministry community and been discussed across platforms covering this story. The account is consistent with what the Roy's report has corroborated through Jonathan and Suzy Lamb's testimony, the recorded November 2023 board meeting, the documented succession plan Marcus had written, and the sequence of institutional decisions that followed his death. The specific details of what Marcus said on that call, the naming of Jonathan, the assignment of roles to Suzy, the framework for Rachel and Rebecca, the deliberate absence of Joni's name from the succession plan, are what Denise has shared, and they align with every documented piece of the succession record that investigative journalism has produced from the other direction. That alignment matters. Denise Boggs was not the source for the Roy's report's investigative reporting on Daystar's finances, the board meeting recording, the GPS tracker expense receipt, the salary documents, or the expense reports. Those materials came through separate channels: Jonathan's own cooperation with investigators, internal document leaks, public property records, and the Trinity Foundation's independent research. But when Denise's account of the hospital bed call is placed alongside all of that documented material, it fits with a precision that uncoordinated fabrication could not produce. A man who built a network and named his son to lead it was telling a trusted friend what he wanted. An institution subsequently spent nearly 5 years removing that son in ways that were expensive, documented, and legally formalized. Both data sets point the same direction. The story of Denise Boggs finally speaking after Joni's death is not, at its center, about internal ministry politics. It is about what it costs to hold a dying man's specific, deliberate, carefully spoken final words in trust, while watching those words be quietly overridden by the institution that was supposed to honor them. Marcus Lamb did not die without saying what he wanted. He picked up a phone. He called someone he trusted. He said specific names. He assigned specific roles. He made his wishes as clear as a man can make them when he knows he is running out of time. What followed across 4.5 years, the NDA demand, the GPS tracker in the company car, the private investigator following Jonathan and Suzy's family on residential streets, the Saturday morning termination delivered by an armed security guard, the phone call Jonathan found out his mother had died from 10 minutes before the public announcement, the funeral where he sat behind a camera while his sister stood on stage, the board member who wept about a dying woman's final wish and then sent a text 2 days later saying none of it had happened. All of that was not the story Marcus told Denise from his hospital bed. It was what the institution did instead. Whether the board will ultimately honor what Marcus asked for, and what Joni reportedly asked for in her final meeting with Tom Callender 3 weeks before she died, is still unresolved. Jonathan has expressed publicly his willingness to pursue reconciliation. The network's July 2026 newsletter, signed by Rachel and Rebecca, speaks of carrying the vision forward alongside the donor base without naming whose vision, without naming Jonathan, and without naming what his parents both apparently said they wanted in the final chapters of their lives. The board has made no formal announcement. The governance structure remains unnamed and unpublished. The financial disclosure Daystar's donors are owed by any reasonable standard of ministry accountability has not appeared.